Thanks for all coming tonight. We appreciate it. We're here to have a presentation done by Municipal Resources Inc, MRI. This is a firm that the City Council engaged with back in April to talk about some of our policies within the police department, whether it's recruiting, training, use of force, etc. So the council was unanimous in bringing these folks on board. We know that they'll be doing the presentation. We will have time for questions only pertinent to the presentation. I want to repeat that. The questions will be pertinent only to the presentation itself. And then we will, the council is here to absorb this as well. We will discuss it. We have a meeting on Monday night, and then we'll move forward from there. But I want to reinforce, this is just the beginning of the process. This is by no way the end of the process whatsoever. So thank you for joining us. I want to welcome the team from MRI, and right here in the middle is Alan Gould, David Kurtz. David, want to raise your hand? Andy Lavoie, and Sean Kelly. I'm going to turn it over to Alan. He'll give an overview of his firm and the tasks that they took on hand. And as I said, we'll be allowing for questions at the end. At the same time, there is the opportunity for people watching at home to submit questions to email, and that's to the email account of Councilman Mike McCarthy. Mike's email address, and it will be shown on camera as well, is mike@ilikemikevt.com. And we'll be showing that throughout the presentation, so people have the opportunity to email their questions in. I cannot reinforce enough that the questions are pertinent to the presentation only. So if we get off that track, we'll put an end to the meeting. Our stop dead time is 8:30 tonight. If there are questions that do not go answered, we will have questions forwarded to City Manager Don McLeod based on the presentation, and he will reach out to Alan and his team to answer those questions, and Don will get back to you. So that's the plan for tonight. Once again, thank you. Thank you for showing interest in the community. And as I said, this is just a beginning. So Alan, if you want to take it.
Sure. Great. Thank you, Mayor. Well, good evening. Thank you, Mayor Smith. And I want to spend a few minutes just kind of talking about who we are and what we're doing here. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
So Municipal Resources Inc. is a company that's been around for 35 years. And all we do really is serve municipalities, towns, and cities. Originally it was kind of throughout New England, but at this point we've done public safety projects from Georgia to the Canadian border in Maine and as far west as Ohio. I'd like to introduce the team, and normally I wouldn't spend this much time introducing us all because we don't like to talk about ourselves, but I think it's important that you understand the values that we represent and the places that we have kind of come from, because we do bring pretty significant national exposure. Dave, on the end, he's a graduate of the FBI National Academy, and he served in law enforcement since 1974. Sorry. He's currently chief of the Durham, New Hampshire Police Department, which is the hometown of the University of New Hampshire. So there's that's quite a diverse community. He was the chief of the Gorham, Maine Police Department. He was the Maine Deputy Director of the Drug Enforcement Agency. He served as he's a CALEA, what we consider a CALEA expert. That's the Commission for Law Enforcement Accreditation. He's one of 12 chiefs that was appointed by the International Association of Chiefs of Police to an advisory group assisting IACP in the formation of training and client needs assessment that may be unique to smaller agencies in the U.S. He's one of 6 police managers instructing with the IACP through the Bureau of Justice Assistance Leading by Legacy program that provides management and leadership skills to rural police agencies throughout the nation. As I mentioned, he's a team leader for the Commission of Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. He's reviewed the policies and procedures of more than 50 police agencies across the country that have been seeking national accreditation and recognition. He's worked with the U.S. Department of Justice on several initiatives, and most recently, he was a contributing author to the 21st Century Task Force report on policing under President Obama. And he's been with MRI longer than I have. He's been with MRI since 2001. Sean Kelly is a graduate of the FBI National Academy. He served in law enforcement since '87. He has served in various command level positions over a span of about 22 years. He last served as the chief of the Ware, New Hampshire Police Department, and there he oversaw the accreditation of the department within 9 months from his appointment, which is really pretty significant. He was appointed by the International Association of Chiefs of Police to the Firearms Committee to study, consider, and determine the various methods and means by which crimes involving firearms are committed, along with methods employed by police agencies to solve and reduce the incidence of gun crimes. He's been appointed as a residential fellow to the United States Drug Enforcement Administration's Leadership Development Unit, and he's contributed to all sorts of training with them. He's been involved with the accreditation of, or the inspection of more than 50 police agencies in the United States. And he has also worked before he came to MRI. He worked as a consultant to the United States Department of Justice, where he specifically dealt with training issues, competencies, and whatnot. Andrew Lavoie, and I'm almost done. Andrew Lavoie has a 32-year career in law enforcement. He served at every rank during his time at the National New Hampshire Police Department, retiring last year after serving 4 years as chief. Nashua is the second largest municipal police department in New Hampshire, which is an internationally accredited community-oriented police department with a diverse community of 88,000 people, with 179 officers and 67 civilians. He's a graduate of the Law Enforcement Executive Development Program, Penn State Advanced Police Executive Program, New England Police Management Program. He's got extensive experience in training, and you'll see the expertise that he can bring tonight. I'm the lowest common denominator, as I tell people. I've been the president of the company for about the last 6 or 7 years. I came to the firm in 2008 after a career of 26 years in law enforcement. I spent my first 21 in the community of Salem, New Hampshire, which was a population of about 30,000 people, had about 100 staff, civilians, and so on. Then I left for a kind of a change in lifestyle, went over to the seacoast of New Hampshire, took over a department of 15 people. As the president of MRI, I have kind of a special connection to the law enforcement stuff we do, so I tend to be pretty hands-on on these projects. While I was an officer in New Hampshire, I served as the New Hampshire Police Academy's sole ethics instructor for 15 years, which meant that I got to spend 4 hours with every police officer in the state of New Hampshire as they were being certified. I took that as a great honor. So that's kind of about us. I've overseen all of our public safety projects since I came to MRI in 2008. And as I mentioned, we've done pretty much the whole Eastern Seaboard, and we've done communities as small as 1 police officer and communities with hundreds of police officers. So this is definitely in our wheelhouse. So the second part of that slide, what are we doing here? So I was contacted by the city manager in early April about helping the city and the PD kind of navigate some rather troublesome recent issues that you've been seeing. And I'm sure that some of those have played out in the headlines, and again, this goes back to early April. We did a real quick assessment, identified a few critical issues, and at the top of our list was really reinforcing what we understand to be best practices in these critical areas. And we saw those as selection, hiring, and background processes, response to force, and police misconduct. Understanding policing is not static, but in constant state of reinforce the concepts of 21st century policing as we address those topics specifically with the City of St. Albans. So toward that end, we reviewed a number of documents provided to us by the city and by the police department. We met with the police department leadership team today to talk about these issues. It would appear that we're all very much on the same team on this. They're very anxious for the assistance that we can provide, and I think it was very good that the city is actually willing to provide our resources to the police department command staff so that we can build upon what is good and make it even better and maybe introduce some more concepts that we have seen because of our national and in some cases international travel. And so we don't have the answers tonight, but what we want to do is express to you pretty much our philosophy in policing and managing of police departments. And we're hoping that you'll understand the foundation that we bring upon which we'll be building with your police department. So with that, I think I would turn it over to Dave, and he's going to talk a little bit about the concepts of 21st century policing and how they apply to the city of St. Albans.
Thank you for inviting us here. We really appreciate the opportunity to work with the city of St. Albans. A lot of the things that we're going to talk to St. Albans PD and the management team is going to focus on 3 areas of 6 areas of the 21st century policing. You can find this online if you Google it. It's the President Obama formed a commission to put this together that focused on these 6 areas, which is building trust and legitimacy, policy and oversight, technology and social media, community policing and crime reduction, training and education, and officer safety and wellness. For the city of St. Albans, we're going to focus on number 1, which is building trust and legitimacy. We're going to focus on number 2, which is policy and oversight. And then number 4, community policing, community engagement, and crime prevention. So again, like Alan said, we're new to the challenges in St. Albans, and we're excited by the opportunity because what we saw was a very engaged police command staff who was really committed to the community, committed to doing the right thing. And for all of us, as we talked about this, it's exciting for us as we move forward, sharing some positive moves that will enhance the police department and provide some opportunity for more engagement with the community and more transparency.
If I could just add to that, Dave, that although the six topics that Dave talked about are attributed to this White House paper on 21st century policing, that just gave it a title. This is what we consider to be good police management, the correct style of policing. And this is something that we were talking about before it was kind of codified into the pillars of community policing and the 21st century policing. Am I right, Dave?
That's right.
So next, I think were you done with that, Dave?
Yep.
Okay, so I think Andy is going to talk to us about adapting to the needs of the community. I think you're both going to talk about that.
Well, again, thank you for having us. And adapting to the needs of the community, that's something that is literally an everyday function of the police department. Things change daily, things change hourly. And certainly, being in contact with all your stakeholders in your community makes you be a better police department as a whole. Officers need to be engaged with their community, and we talk about best practices here. And this is just from our experience. I mean, some very, I don't want to say old, we're very experienced, police chiefs here, but, we've made all the mistakes, or we've seen people make mistakes, and hopefully, we all learn from them. And that's why we're here. We're here to share our knowledge. And, what works in Nashua, works in Durham, works everywhere, and will work here. It's literally, you need to be out in the community and asking, what can we do? How can we help you? This is a service-based profession. We don't provide a product as a police department, in my opinion. We provide services. And each and every one of you are our customers. And, it's our job, if we're not doing the job we want, it's our job to ask and know about it and work together, and that's the key, work together to figure out how we can work for you, within the parameters of whatever, legalities or whatever issues that you have. Because again, the police are bound by certain restrictions, by certain laws, but, being out in the community, being part of your local community and clubs and Rotary Lions, whatever you have, Boys and Girls Clubs, anything you have, that's very important because it's all about community engagement, because nothing's static. What was great yesterday, as we we've seen isn't great today. So this is the type of stuff that, it's incumbent upon the police department to ask and to know their community, and the only way to do that is to be out interacting and being part of that community.
I'll follow that up with, this isn't new. Much of this is not new. Not to get preachy on this, but Aristotle talked about creating guardians for the community, and those were people who were entrusted with the public's will to ensure that people were safe and that laws were being followed. And it went on through the 1800s with one of the fathers of law enforcement was considered to be Robert Peel from England, who talked about the people are the police and the police are the people. And those are old thoughts that are still hold significant value today. Right now there's a lot of discussion about a guardian warrior mentality. We're happy to see that the command staff who spoke today is very much embracing the guardian philosophy, and we'll enhance that and kind of provide recommendations for them on that to enhance that, more community engagement, more transparency, more procedural justice, things of that edict that are relevant to what's going on in St. Albans. And like I said, it would be wonderful if we had a magic formula here and see you later, but we don't. So we look forward to working with the department and the city manager and the council to arrive at the location that they're all looking to be at.
And I would just add that policing is not done to a community, policing is done with a community, and I think that that's kind of an important concept. And again, to talk about the guardian and the warrior, well, 90% of police officers' duties deal with the guardian side of things. It's responding to calls that don't involve force. It's it's being some social worker. It's being all these different things that different people need on every call. But you need to be the warrior for that 10% of the time when things get really ugly. I think that all of us up here would be considered strong law and order types of police chiefs. So there's nothing soft about what we're talking about at all. It's a matter of striking the right balance and knowing when the switch has to get flipped. And I think that, in my background, that's something that, I learned pretty early on, and, that switch can still be flipped. But I was 90% guardian. I was helping the elderly. I was helping the victims of domestic violence, helping the kids that were caught in between the partners. And that's 90% of the job. But you better be ready to go for that other 10% of the job. So we want to make sure in all the departments we work in, we really stress that guardian warrior balance, because we think that that's absolutely critical to the community. Let's see, I guess I'm up next. So to me, and I think we would all agree, the selection process is really the absolute key component to what makes your police department what it is. The PD is only as good as the men and women that are out there walking the beat, patrolling in the patrol cars or in your schools, or coming to your house when you call for them. Hiring the right people is just absolutely critical to the image and the ultimate success of the department. The consequences of hiring the wrong person are just absolutely significant. And we preach, don't settle. When you're doing hiring, don't settle, don't compromise your standards ever. Leave the position vacant if you have to, but don't compromise your standards, because it just takes one bad act from one person who may have just made a mistake, but maybe it was just somebody you shouldn't have hired, and it can change everything for a police department. The hiring process should be comprehensive and recognize the needs of the community. It should include representatives of the community, as well as various components of the PD. So one of the things that we talked about today with the command staff was, when you do oral interviews at that stage of the process, which is just one small stage of the process, that should be comprised of all different components of the police department. There's a civilian side of the police department. You have records clerks, you have secretaries, you have administrative assistants, whatever. You have patrol officers, you have sergeants, lieutenants, captains, right? So there should be a component representing most of those pieces. But there should also be a component representing the community. So we believe that there should probably be a minimum of 2 stakeholders that participate in the selection process at some point. And for us, the natural point is at the onboard process, because you've narrowed it down to some number of people that would be interviewed in a one-day process. So we think that that's pretty important. And we do a ton of hiring. I happen to oversee all of our recruitments, whether it's town manager, finance director, or whatever it is. We do those recruitments across New England, and I oversee them all. And what I always tell the clients is that you hire for traits and train for skills. So I know it's cheaper to hire a certified police officer that comes to you ready to go, but if the personality isn't right, if the character isn't right, if they're not a good fit with your community or a good fit with your police department, it's not the right hire. You're much better off making some additional investment in a person with the right traits, and then train them to be the police officer that they need to be, because you can't train traits into somebody. And then, to me, I'm losing my voice. To me, the most important part of the hiring process is actually the background investigation. So I presented Dawn with some of the backgrounds. We do a ton of backgrounds, because we do them on every hiring process that we're involved in. And then there are many places in New England hire us just to do backgrounds. And our typical background, it has 12 to 14 pages of written narrative, and then it has about 100 pages of support material. So by the time we have hired that police officer, that police chief, we hire a lot of police chiefs, that planning director, whatever the position is, we know thoroughly about that person's background. And it's that document, that 100 pages, that 14-page narrative upon which you make your decision. So the whole screening process narrowed it down, and now you're going to look at this background and say, okay, this is the right person, or this isn't the right person. If it's not the right one, you go on to the next person on the list, and you vet that person the same way. So to us, that the background is absolutely the most critical component of a police department. And then after that, you've got the proper onboarding to establish the proper culture. What do I mean by onboarding? That's the orientation. You have an FTO program, so it's who's indoctrinating them to the police department. Who are they going out and riding with to see how the city of St. Albans, thank you, John, to see how the city of St. Albans Police Department polices, because they're gonna model that behavior. So picking your police training officers is just absolutely critical as well. And then for that first year and for the rest of their career, it's about ongoing performance evaluations that reinforce good behavior, and it's very thorough internal investigations that show that there are consequences for bad behavior. And the good people will continue, they'll flourish, they'll be rewarded. And if you have bad actors, then it's not going to take too long if the internal investigations are correct. We talked about an early warning system with your command staff today, which tracks things, everything from absenteeism to use of force to citizen complaints. Because when you start to see trends among an officer, when those things start to go up, that's kind of an early warning signal to you, and you need to start looking at what's changed with this officer, what's the problem, and then begin to address that, and then perhaps you can recover that officer. Otherwise, they're going to find their way out the door really quickly, we would hope. So now we have use of force, and I think that was going to be Dave and Sean. So I don't know which one of you was going to lead that.
Sean.
Okay. So what we're going to do is work with the command staff here and review the policies that you already have in place, suggest where it's appropriate some changes to those policies, putting emphasis in areas such as, when is certain types of force allowed? If force is used, when should it stop? If an officer is using force that another officer thinks is inappropriate, direct them to intervene. We're going to ask the police department to look at uses of force in every instance format, ask the officers to report separately, when they've used force, by definition developed by the police department, what is comfortable with your culture here in St. Albans. Independently review each one of those instances, and then at the end of the year, conduct a thorough analysis of the whole program.
That is made public.
Right. So that's an important component to the idea of transparency and accountability of your police department. Having this report come out and that describes the type of uses of force, when the force occurred, the analysis goes into depth in terms of what's the day, the time, the ages of the officers that use force, what's their level of training, what are the components that went into it. Is it because the officer went to a lot of live burglaries? Did they go to deal with a lot of bar fights? You know, whatever is the type of policing that is being done here will be analyzed against the types of uses of force and inform the chief of police and the community about what can be done next. Okay?
You know, as I'm listening to Sean talk about this, there's always the realization that to us as police managing professionals, this is pretty interesting stuff to us. But the reality is that it may not be to you, unless you believe your police department's not utilizing force in an appropriate manner. One of the things that we want to bring to the table for the consideration is that transparency, that idea that while you, as the citizens of St. Albans, give policing powers to the guardians of your community, that they also have an obligation to report back to you how that power is being utilized on an annual basis. And so one of the things that we want to talk about with St. Albans is, Police Department, is how in best practice, every time an officer utilizes any level of force which is defined by the department, and it may be as simple as, for instance, removing their weapon from the holster, not doing anything with it other than keeping it down by the side because they believe they're in a dangerous situation. But that very motion of removing that weapon from the holster could be deemed as a use of force, because the potential is there. That would be then reported in a special report, which would be, in best practice, refers to as response to resistance. And even this is really subtle, but really important for the citizens of St. Albans to understand that police officers in this community should only be utilizing force when it's in response to resistance. That's the only time. That would be when they would be authorized. That's an important distinction. And so at the end of the year, best practice says that all of those use of force issues are accumulated, they're analyzed, and as Sean was saying, all the demographic information, all of the times, the day of the week, all of that's valuable for understanding where your police officers should be, because these are the busy times. But more importantly, are they utilizing force in the right manner? Is Dave Kurz using force more than anybody else? Well, if that's the case, why is Dave Kurz using force more than anyone else? It gives the department the tools to look at these kinds of things and understand that. And again, I want to make sure that I'm clear on this point. Police departments exist because you want them to exist. And the reality is you give them the power to do that. And you're essentially giving them trust, and what they owe back to you is the transparency to determine or to demonstrate to you that they're worthy of that trust. And those are the things that we're going to be bringing to the table. And what we're very excited about seeing is when we're discussing these things with the police professionals on your agency, your department, is that they're embracing this, they're saying that's what a great idea, and they're being exposed to some of these best practices of the United States Police.
Just to jump on one other thing that Dave said, is this use of force report, as we would call it, every time that's done because someone, let's just say, use that same example, removed the pistol from a holster, that trigger, wrong phrase, that initiates this use of force report, which then goes immediately to a supervisor, you know, in the next day or whatever, and then that incident itself gets reviewed for whether that was appropriate use of force or not. So it's not that this just gets looked at annually, it gets looked at as it happens, so that corrective actions can be taken before there's a problem. The annual reporting happens, you know, to the community as a part of the transparency, and for an agency to look back and see how it's done over the last year. So I didn't want anybody to think that this is something that, oh, somebody does something today and it's not going to be addressed until the end of the year. This is a continual process, and it's a continual check and balance, because if we don't hold our people accountable, you know, there's nothing. So what we really stress is that a police department has to hold its people accountable first, and then the community holds the police department accountable. And I think that that's a basic principle of that you'll hear from us as we proceed. Did you have either of you on the force issues? No? Dave? So then Andy's going to talk a little bit about transparency and response to police misconduct.
You know, you hear us talk about transparency so much, and again, having the philosophy that we in the police business provide a service, and that service is to you folks who are the customers. And you know, we recommend a well-defined citizen complaint program at any police department. And you know, that certainly helps with transparency. You know, any citizen complaint program, you know, is for the protection of the public, protection of the department, protection of the officers and employees, removal of unfit personnel. That's a huge one. I mean, policy adjustments. You get a citizen complaint about, you know, a certain officer, maybe the officer followed the proper procedure, but when you investigate the complaint, you realize that, you know what, your procedure needs to change. It wasn't the officer's fault. The officer did what he was directed to do, but in looking at the circumstances, you need to update your policy. So that all helps the police department by looking within. You have to be able to critique and criticize yourself. And the transparency part of a citizen complaint program is, you know, the chief of police or his or her designee should be in contact with the citizen that makes a complaint right away. There should be a defined process of how a complaint is taken. You should take anonymous complaints. You shouldn't just ignore a complaint because nobody will get behind the complaint. I mean, you could get incredibly important information that you need to know as a police department. And because it comes in as anonymous, you're just going to disregard it. That's crazy. Again, it's all about, you know, looking into your own police department and making these decisions on your own to benefit the public. Any citizen complaint program, and Vermont has their Act 56, I believe it is, and that's reporting procedures for certain levels of crime in Vermont, and that's reported to the Vermont, you know, Training Council. But certainly, even the minor citizen complaints from a police department, again, are crucial. But the big thing on transparency on citizen complaints is somebody getting back to the citizen that their complaint is in fact being taken. Their complaint will in fact be investigated, and their complaint will in fact have a disposition. Now, whether that disposition is not sustained, here's why. And the chief should do that in writing and should send it to the complainant saying, here's the reason it was investigated, this is who investigated it, as we spoke when you made the complaint. The chief should know about every single complaint that comes in, and the chief should know that within the next day. They should be right on the complaint form. The chief has to initial the form to show that the chief got it, and you know, to be aware of it. You know, I was from a police department of 179 officers, and I knew about every citizen complaint. That's our job. It's a chain of command. So certainly any size department, any citizen complaint needs to matter to the command staff, needs to matter to the chief, because they being the citizens, are trying to tell the police there's an issue. Now, that issue may be perception. It could be something as simple as an inquiry. You know, why did two officers, you know, pull me over and a backup officer came by? You know, what was the reason of that? It may just be, well, our policy is if you're in the area, you always back up one another on traffic stop. It could literally be that simple. So you might want to call that an inquiry, but that's something that you're letting the citizen know, A, there's an answer to this, and that we took your complaint, it was investigated, we looked into it. But, you know, there's certain legal, you know, preclusions from saying a disposition on a case where, let's say, an officer was wrong, the officer was disciplined, yet the officer was not terminated. depending on your state, depending on collective bargaining agreements, you may not be able to list the exact punishment of the officer, but you most definitely have to let the citizen who made the complaint know that there was a disposition, that this complaint was sustained, and proper discipline was taken against the officer. Any citizen complaint program needs to coexist with a discipline program, and it should be set up on the progressive discipline system, which means if an officer's late, really firing should not be the first option. We've got a lot invested in this officer. Maybe we can do some retraining and do things like that progressively up the chain. That certainly doesn't mean if there's something egregious under a progressive discipline program, you don't automatically have to start with the lowest thing. Some things people do require termination, and that is the only option. So again, that's certainly the type of thing that needs to be done, and it all has to be done. It all has to be something you practice. It has to be something you do each and every time, because that codifies it to the citizens that you take their complaints seriously, that you're going to investigate their complaints. That's the biggest thing you hear. You should set time limits on the complaints as well. We'll get back to you within whatever, 10 days, 20 days, 30 days, depending on the severity of the complaint. And you get back to them so they know that the complaint just didn't go into that magic place and never come back again. They need to know that you're taking it seriously. Again, because it helps your department. It could be something that you weren't aware of and now you need to fix. And you work together to fix it. And certainly, if there is something wrong, we talk about transparency and police misconduct. You need to be there, you need to stand there, you need to say, we were wrong, here's why we were wrong, and here's what we did to fix it. And to me, that's what transparency is all about. Because, as Dave said, you give the police the power to police. So it's certainly their job to cherish that and to give feedback to their community. All that being said, any disciplinary or citizen complaint program needs to coincide with some type of an early warning system. Because again, the citizens should always be the ones that tell us we have a problem. It's incumbent upon us as police professionals to clean up our own house. And certainly many things go into it. Citizen complaints, the use of force, all kinds of things. There's all kinds of software you can buy, all fancy stuff that will let you know if an officer's got this and this many complaints and this many things. You can literally do that on an Excel sheet. 179 officers. We did ours on an Excel sheet. You don't have to buy expensive software or anything like that. And, it's important, and it should be brought to the attention of the chief and the command staff at least quarterly. If you're just doing this annually, which you will do annually and you will share with the public, but with your complaints and your use of force and things like that. But, you can't have an early warning system that has no intervention for a year at a time. It needs to be in blocks and broken up, because the idea of an early warning system is to catch an issue early so it doesn't become a major problem. And again, that's incumbent upon any complaint system, any discipline system. It all needs to be together. Everything works in conjunction. And again, transparency, can't be afraid to say we made a mistake, but you need to say, we found it and we're going to fix it. Here's how we're going to fix it.
And there shouldn't be, we're talking about complaints like that, you should be dealing with a lot of them. What was the stat you had in National?
Yeah, National PD's been internationally accredited since 1991. I worked there from 1987 up until last July 31st. And 1 year, my final year for statistics as chief, you talk about, well, you either have to be a guardian or you have to be a warrior. That's not true at all. You could certainly be both. We answered almost 100,000 calls for service. We made almost 5,000 arrests. And we had 16 citizen complaints. 1-6. And we take every complaint. We take an honors. We're nationally accredited, internationally accredited. Somebody walks by thinking about making a complaint at the police department, we take a complaint. So, that's something that I was incredibly proud of for the men and women of the National Police Department. But, when you're answering that many calls, when you're making that many arrests, you're certainly not soft on crime in any way, shape, or form. But that certainly doesn't mean you can't do your job professionally, and you can't do your job as a guardian.
And just to kind of start to wrap things up a little bit, we take policing the police, I guess is a term I could use, or holding police accountable very seriously. At any given time, we're probably juggling a half a dozen internal investigations that we're doing for various towns or cities around New England. And so we're not just, you know, four old guys up here talking to you about what we used to do. We're still practicing this. So Sean, I think, has 2 internals assigned to him. Andy I think you just finished 2. I don't have Dave doing them right now. And then there's another half a dozen. These are our employees. These aren't just police chiefs that we grabbed and whatnot. These are MRI employees. And there's another half dozen of us that do this stuff. And so we're doing those internals for police departments that trust us to do them. You know, it's kind of funny. I was joking with your command staff today that typically when we get called into an agency, we walk in the front door, people are running out the back door because of our reputation, and they think that if we're there, something bad's going to happen because something bad did happen and we're there to kind of clean it up. In this case, this was totally proactive on the part of your city manager and the council in recognizing that there may perhaps be a problem. Let's see if MRI can come in and help us with this. So when we walked into the room today with Dom and the command staff, there was nobody exiting. Everybody was still facing us, which was really nice for us. A lot of our internals, we take this so seriously, that a lot of our internals end up in terminations. They're all pretty much, many are actionable. You know, when somebody deserves to be cleared, they get cleared. There are police officers that have been sentenced with jail time as a result of actions that were part of an internal investigation that involved use of force or some other inappropriate conduct. When I say that we're also practitioners, so you heard Andy say that he commanded a police department of 170 some odd police officers. And then earlier this year, I guess it was last year, he accepted an assignment from me to be the interim police chief in a community with 4?
Well, there were supposed to be 10, you told me, and there were actually 3 cops.
Because
So you knew I wouldn't take the job if you said there were 3.
yeah, I got you. So I don't want you to think that we're just up here talking about this stuff. This is stuff that we do. At any given time, we have one of our people that's serving as an interim police chief someplace. And this is what we do. We're very serious about the outcome of our projects. We think that every place we touch, we hope we've left it much better. It all comes down to how cooperative the agency is with us and how much the governing body wants it to happen. If the governing body wants it to happen, it'll happen. And if they don't care, then it's totally left up to the police department. I can say that we were very happy today with the meeting that we had with your command staff. We provided them with a number of documents, some model policies, just to kind of give them an idea of where we were coming from and what it was about. Some of those policies can be adopted almost immediately. We can help them develop any policies that they need. We can do an entire set of best practice policies because we have that literally on a thumb drive. And it's a matter of tailoring it to your community with your command staff. So we don't come in and say, here's your policy on hiring. We come in and we say, here's a policy that represents best practice. And I think that when you tailor it to what you need with our help, that this will be a great policy for you to use, and more importantly, for the community. And I hope that that's what we can do with starting with your most critical policies, really, which are to me, the hiring and the background piece, the response to resistance piece, use of force, if you will, and internal investigation type things. So those are things they're high risk. Those are things that we can share. We can take care of that immediately. But we go to so many places where the command staff is resistant to change. Hey, this is the way we've always done it, Mr. Gould. And, I know they're not saying this to me, but they're thinking, this is the way we've always done it, and you're not going to come in here and tell us, we're not going to change. And that's not what we see here, and that's really refreshing for us. So, our intent is to go forward hand in hand with the police department and reinforce best practices in all instances. We made it very clear to them today too that aside from those tasks that we may work with them on specifically, at any time they need advice, they need input, they will need to bounce something off of somebody, all they have to do, they have all of our business cards, but all they really have to do is call me or shoot me an email, and if it's not one of us that can answer their question or help solve the problem, it's one of the people at MRI that isn't here with us tonight. That because we've had so much exposure to virtually anything you can think of, although whenever I say that, I get surprised. So that's, I think, what we're here to help this community with, to help your police department. Your police department seems very enthusiastic about the help that's being provided by the mayor, council, and city manager. And I hope that we can really capitalize on that momentum and help move you folks forward and put some of those issues that maybe brought us here back in early April, put some of those behind you so that they don't happen again. So with that, I know the mayor said that we'd be able to take questions. We'd like them to be very related to this topic because we know that since we were engaged by the city, there's become a national dialogue from incidents that have happened several months later. This was all in the works well before any of the national issues that have come to light. So we'd like to stay on what we discussed tonight. We can't answer any questions you have specifically about the St. Albans Police Department, but we can take a shot at almost anything anybody wants to throw out there as long as it's pretty directly related to the issues we've discussed tonight. Is that fair? Yes, I think we're supposed to have a microphone back. I'm going to put the microphone back up over here, and I think they'd like you to use the microphone. Everybody likes talking in the mic.
The issue of response to resistance is clearly the trigger then for use of force. So the question becomes, how do you define resistance in terms of what justifies the use of force? So we've seen cases where simply not following, an intoxicated man not following an officer's instruction is considered resistance and results in one instance we saw in taser use. So how do you define resistance is going to be the question, and how are you going to recommend that the SAPD defines resistance?
Dave, is that something you...
Sure. We will help the department define what resistance is, and it will be modeling against best practices, not just because anyone says so. It will be best practice. There's passive resistance and there's active resistance, and each has its own level of force that would be used so that the officer can fulfill their lawful duty. And in excess of that becomes that error that we were talking about, that mistake, that offense, that violation of policy. And that is where each individual use of force would be analyzed to determine what you're asking.
Yeah. And I guess just a little more on that, if I could, Dave, is that when people talk, when you mention like use of force, people usually think that means, actually physically some kind of, shoot, tase, spray, whatever it is. There's verbal. There's all these, it's a whole continuum. We call it force because that's the word that's always been used, but there's this whole continuum of response to that. And I think that's really what we're talking about is so the example you used, that kind of resistance, well, what was the force that was used to overcome that? Was it verbal commands? It might be actually de-escalating the situation. I was never the biggest guy. I've weighed like 170 pounds since high school. So if I got in a lot of fights with people, I was gonna lose a lot of fights. So for me, de-escalation was a really good idea. And that was, why I'm still able to walk and talk and got the job done. So there are so many ways you can respond. The response has to be appropriate. We had a question online. Mary asked, you talked about two stakeholders involved in hiring officers. Why only two? It doesn't have to be two, but it has to be a reasonable number. So again, I said we do a lot of hiring processes, and you have to have a manageable number. So on like an oral interview type process, more than 9 is not manageable. So the sweet spot is someplace between 5 and 9. So could there be 3? Sure, there could be 3. Could there be 9? That becomes kind of cumbersome in just the mechanics of doing an oral board type interview. So it doesn't have to be 2. It can be some other number, but it has to be manageable logistically to be able to do the oral board or the oral interview, if that makes sense. And just from our experience, that is a sweet spot number between 5 and 9. So if you're going to involve representatives of the police department, you could have 4 members of the community. It really doesn't matter. But do you want 10? That just becomes unmanageable.
The other thing you can do, Mary, is have your community represented at each of the processes, and there might be somebody different stakeholders in each one of the processes, so that more of the community is engaged at some point over time.
We wouldn't advocate that it always be the same people.
Right.
That should be something that just kind of rotates, and that would be up to something to be worked out between the council and the chief as to how those people are going to be picked. Probably shouldn't be picked by the police department. Should probably be picked by people from outside of the police department, like the council, the city manager, something like that. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'd like to speak to you. I've heard Nashville, New Hampshire, Salem, New Hampshire, and Durham, and then the Seacoast, which I'm sure was a good way to finish out. When you make recommendations to a town or city like St. Albans, we're much smaller than almost all of them. Probably closest would be Durham. Do you adjust the policies you recommend to that size and to the type of community we are? We're a lot of farming community around here. And also, do you adjust your hiring and vetting process for a town or city that's so close and small versus what you might find in Nashville, New Hampshire, where your pool is 80,000 people, and the pool here is 5,000?
But I know what you want to say. Can we say no at the same time?
So I'll just talk about the policies, I'm going to talk about the hiring.
Yep.
All right. So the hiring and vetting is absolutely the same. I don't care if you're a 2-person police department, because the power that you give to that person, the right to take somebody's freedom, the right to pull the trigger on a gun, whatever it is, that's all the same. It doesn't matter, right? So that is absolutely irrelevant. The reason I mentioned that, Andy's gone from a department of 174 officers to this community of 3 or 4. What we do is all scalable. Right is right. Well, you're going to address the policy piece.
The policy is irrelevant to the size of the agency. It's the tasks that they accomplish and the guidelines that they need to accomplish them. So it really doesn't matter. And your standards of hiring should be no less than any other department that has 2,000 officers, the FBI, or down the street in Burlington. They're the same.
Exactly the same. We're all looking for the best people. We're not looking for the best cops. We'll teach you how to be a cop. We'll teach you how to be a national cop, how to be a Durham cop, a riot cop, any of that stuff. But we can't teach you how to be a good person. So that's what we're looking for. Anything else, then we do that after the fact.
What's your expression, Alan?
Trades, skills. So, and then about kind of the scalability of the policies, best practice is always going to be best practice. But it's how do you apply that in the community? So I've worked with police departments of 1, 2 police departments of 1, where the Board of Selectmen really wasn't seeing eye to eye with the police chief, or in some of those communities of one police officer, they may not be getting somebody that's an experienced police officer, let alone police chief. So we've worked in those communities of one, and the basic policies are still the same because best practice is best practice. But here's kind of an example. When we go into when we do an organizational study, and we do a lot of them, one of the first things I ask for is Chief, can I have your SOPs, your standard operating procedures? They should know exactly where they are. They should be handing me a thumb drive, right? Some will get up and they'll look for a book that they think is on the shelf, and they'll kind of dust it off, and they'll hand it to me. And I'll go to just a couple of policies that I always want to take a really quick look at that will give me an idea of how they do. And very often, it's apparent to me that they borrowed the policy from another police department. So you could get Burlington's policies. Is Burlington accredited?
No.
No, okay. Well, they could get the policies from an accredited police department, which represent best policy, and then best practice. Then I start to read it, and it will refer to, complaints are referred to the Internal Affairs Bureau. And we're talking about a police department of, let's say, 5 people, right? Well, there's no internal affairs. It'll make reference to a deputy chief or a captain. So all they did was change the name of the department, and it totally does not apply. One of the ones I always look for is the police driving or police pursuit policy. And it'll always say something like, the supervisor on duty will have the authority to call off the pursuit, blah, blah, blah. So we're talking about a lot of these towns only have one officer on, particularly on the midnight shift. And these are relatively small towns. So I'll say to the chief, so when this officer gets in a pursuit at 2 o'clock tomorrow morning, who's the supervisor that's going to call him off? And they'll look at me with a puzzled look. And I'll say, no, really. So your policy says that the supervisor on duty has the authority to call that officer off. So who's going to call off the officer? Because we all know the guy driving the cruiser at 100 miles an hour isn't the right one to make the choice as to whether this is safe or not. That's why somebody not involved in the pursuit makes that call.
That's best practice.
Yeah. So the chief will say, well, they'll call me at home. Dispatch will call me at home. So I'll say, okay. So it's when you went to bed, it was clear out. It was 40 degrees. It's now 2 o'clock in the morning. You've been asleep for 4 hours. There's 2 inches of snow, and it's 23 degrees out. You're going to call. What are you going to base your judgment on? And then they're like, So as far as I'm concerned, there should be a no pursuit policy when there's only one officer on duty because there's nobody to call it off. So there's no independent judgment, no detached person that's going to make that decision. So they have best practice. The policy that you would get from any larger department says supervisor can call it off. Well, in your department, that's not going to be in the policy because you don't have a supervisor that's going to call it off. Does that make sense?
It's going to be adjustable, but the bottom line is the fast answer to you is no. There's no difference. There'll be nuances. Like if I have a helicopter, I should have a policy about running the helicopter. But if I don't have one, there's no need to do that. So, I mean, I'm being a little exaggerated, but that's essentially the point. The essence of good policy, best practice, and accreditation, this CALEA thing that we've done, and it's, if you want to, anyone's interested, it's CALEA is CALEA.org.
Yes.
And you can check it out online to see what it is. What essentially accreditation work is about best practices, number one, and then number two, that just because you have best practices doesn't mean that the police department's following them. We can assure you from our experiences that there are many police departments that have exceptionally good policy, but they don't adhere to it. Accreditation sends out 3 people from wherever, and they come in with white gloves and inspect whether you're following what you say you do. That's the essence. And so that's something that we would recommend to the city of St. Albans down the road. Right now, we're focusing on those areas that we've already discussed. But having good policy, assurances that your department is abiding by it, gives faith to the community that it's not just because I, as your police chief, say so. It's because there's some people coming in who, by the way, are particularly my buddies, They're coming in to assess me, and candidly, not desirous to look for things wrong, but if things are wrong, we don't get reaccredited. And that's the way it works. So the bottom line is, the short answer is no. Policy is policy. Pursuit driving is pursuit driving, whether there's one officer in the department or whether there's 1,000 officers on the department. Using force is the same as that there's 1,000 people versus one person on the. It's irrelevant. They're all the same. Best practice is best practice.
And what goes hand in hand with the policies, and we talked to your command staff about this today, is that it's not only changing the policies, now it's distributing those policies throughout the department, training people in the policies, on those policies that require training. Most of these high-risk policies we're talking about would require some amount of training. And then the officers have to sign off and acknowledge that they understand the policy, that they were trained in the policy, and that they have no questions. Because we'll go in to do an internal, we'll find a violation of a policy, and then we'll say to the chief, okay, so show us where this officer was provided with this policy. Because the officer's always going to claim, oh, I didn't know. They never told me that. Well, it's a written policy, right? So on virtually every policy, there should be a sign-off somewhere that this officer read and understood the policy and had an opportunity to ask questions. So that's another piece of that accountability. You can't hold somebody accountable unless it's documented. If it isn't documented, it didn't happen, is one of our little sayings. So that's just really important, and I think that we can help, the St. Albans Police Department kind of through that a little bit. So it's not just about writing paper that sits on a shelf. We also recommend that these policies be available in the cruisers. If you have mobile data terminals, laptops in the cars, whatever various people call them. So at any given time, they could call up a policy and read it and understand it. Ask questions if they have it. They should be available. It shouldn't be a matter of, gee, I don't know where our policies are. They should be able to say, yep, they're right here, and be able to get to those policies in like a couple of seconds. So it's not just the piece of paper. It's that the policy becomes a part of the culture of the police department. We're really talking about culture here.
Sir, in the case of these municipalities and cities that want to actually punish the law enforcement by defunding them, if you would, won't that have an effect on 911? Aren't the law enforcement the other half of 911?
My view with the defunding, and I'll let everybody can talk, I just have the biggest mouth, is that there are going to be some really significant consequences down the road for that. We've all been in some of the worst situations, some situations that people should never have to be in, and we've had to deal with them. So there's a place for social work. There's a place for that. But defunding the police department, and if they start laying off police officers wholesale in different places, if you then try to, a year or some months, a couple of years down the road, when the consequences of not having a trained professional respond in an appropriate way to that domestic call, and we've all been there, when you go to try to now hire that volumes of police officers across the country to fill those gaps, there are going to be dire consequences. And there are going to be a lot of probably the wrong people hired to fill the spots. And I just think that that's a disaster. That's my own personal opinion. And we are people that have dealt with the worst of situations, and there have to be people that do that. But I can also say that we've helped people in the best of situations. And to us, that's the much more rewarding piece. And it's really about having police officers be able to strike that balance. That's the best of both worlds.
You could pay me enough money to be a police officer.
We also did a study recently with a relatively forward-thinking organization where they were asking us if we could help them determine where they might be best to civilianize, and that included social workers, because there's a realization, the reality is that our society is doing a horrible job at dealing with mental illness, and they've stopped funding a whole bunch of things. So when you see someone having a problem, who do you call? I bet it's the police. So the police, unfortunately, are not initially trained to deal with a lot of these things. We're advocating, for instance, that maybe the best thing to do would be, if this is one of your problems and they have the data to support it, and they did, that maybe you put a social worker on full-time on the department. Now you start freeing up the officer who has no ability, they can stop whatever it is that's going on at that moment. Whether it's good or satisfactory is another issue. But if you had a social worker that was teamed up with the police officer, there's more opportunity to solve this problem. So that social worker can follow it up the next day when the person is not in crisis. That make sure they're getting what they need for either medication or assistance or programs. All of that makes so much sense. But it does take, everything's about money. And if that's what you're going to do, having an officer go, I mean, for instance, there's calls that police officers go to, or the fire department goes to, or the rescue goes to, they won't go in the building until the police are there.
So what you're talking about with the social work is like aftercare.
Yeah.
So that after the intervention is done, I think, to me, the piece that policing misses in a lot of places is who puts the pieces together for the victim, for the suspect, the person who was arrested, because there's always kind of an underlying issue. You know, why did this happen? Is it a drug dependency problem? Is that why they're burglarizing the house? You know, why are there domestics? How's that impacting the kids? That's all aftercare, but the police need to be there to stop the bad behavior.
They're not designed to do that.
If I can just add, in Nashville, we were lucky enough to have, due to a grant, probably for an entire year, a year ago it started, 24/7 on-call mental health counselors. And they weren't so much embedded with our police officers, but they were literally, you know, a phone call away, we'll respond within whatever, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. They were all throughout the city. And, you know, they always came for people in mental health crisis, and certainly we trained de-escalation and all that stuff. But they would never, ever, ever enter that residence without the police. Ever. So to take the police away, I just think, and I don't want to speak, I can't speak for everybody, but I don't think people can grasp what an out-of-control situation really is until they've been there. And it's not, some people can't be de-escalated right away. They just can't. And when the mental health workers, if this is their profession, will not go in, and you can't blame them. I mean, we don't want to go in, but we have to. They would never do that. I just think, I don't want to say it's being naive. I just think it's a lack of experience to understand how bad somebody in crisis physically can be. And these mental health workers certainly don't get paid enough to do that. And Manchester Police Department, through a grant, actually, which is the largest city in New Hampshire, they do the social worker after any domestic, quite frankly. Even domestics where people aren't, one of the parties are not arrested. They have a social worker and a detective visit the house the next day if there's children in the house and ask to speak to the children to see if the children need services. So something like that's great. That's thinking outside of the box. But there's a very different thing about an in-progress call. And it's just, in my opinion, of 32 years as a police officer, it's not appropriate to have to try to de-escalate somebody like that. For a mental health worker by themselves.
No, so other questions? Yes, sir.
I have a question.
I've had my hands up. Yeah. I'm going to ask my question. Hi. I appreciate that you have multiple times throughout this expressed the necessity of having community involvement in adapting policing protocols and procedures. And so I'm curious, in your vast experience in doing this work, if you've ever had an oversight committee of this process, of you being involved with the police and with the city council, and if that's something that we could do in our city while this is ongoing. Because it sounds like you're at the beginning of your process of working with the city and with the police.
So when you talk about, did you say, what did you call it, an oversight?
Over community involvement, oversight, whatever you want to call it, of this process that you're doing right now.
Well, I mean, to me, it's that, you know, you elected a city council that represents the people. And, you know, they've entrusted us with this work. We're accountable to them, they're accountable to you. So to us, they represent the community. So you would express, the community would express its desires through the council. You know, we don't want to make this a lot of this just, like best practice isn't something that can really be up for debate. So best practices, because it's been nationally, in many cases internationally recognized through the court systems, through all sorts of processes. So, you know, you just can't second guess some of that stuff. Now, if the police department is transparent and it involves the community to the extent that is reasonable, and has this ongoing engagement that we've talked about, there should be no surprises. The community should be part of the policing effort through the channels that are already available to it, which is the governing body. But, you know, for us to come in and say, just we really think you want to modify this policy, here's the best practice, and then have some civilian oversight group that has never been in those situations, to me, that's, it defeats the purpose. You know, as law enforcement experts, as practitioners, as a group that understands recognized, national and internationally recognized best practice, that's kind of what we want to get to. Now, it's up to the people to hold the department accountable to those standards that we would help create, and you would hold the department accountable through your elected body is the best way that I can answer that. And I don't think you want to take the expert subjects that require expertise. I don't think that you want to have lay people being able to interfere with that to some degree. Interfere is not the right word, but
dictate policy.
Yeah, because sometimes it's very technical. But to hold your police department accountable to what are very reasonable standards is the way it should be. And that should be through a process of engagement, involvement to the degree practical, and transparency.
One of the things that you heard from just about everybody sitting on this panel this evening is this concept of accreditation. And when you use a system like accreditation, which we are anticipating recommending down the road, what happens there is practitioners that have no vested interest in the community. That sounds strange, but hear me out first. They don't particularly have an interest in whether the police department passes or fails, so to speak. They look at your organization in a very non-emotional, objective way and report back to a commission of 21 people that are judges, lawyers, police chiefs, heads of industry, education, with this broad scope view. And they say that the East Overshore, or in this case the St. Albans Police Department, can or cannot demonstrate compliance with these industry best practices and standards. The risk of having using your term, ma'am, an oversight here locally is that you put too much local emotion into the observance of the police department's ability or inability to comply. And I think that there's too much risk associated with that. Whereas having an external body report to your elected officials, and they say in a very objective way, yay or nay, with regard to best practices, and then you hold your elected officials accountable to that. Yes?
I dare say that your code, and I haven't, you're operating under a manager or mayor form of government?
Council manager.
Okay, so everyone works for you. So there's a guy that hires the police chief, and that's by code, or your ordinance charter. And so your government is already set up to function like that. You need a real change in that to do something different, which would then become burdensome. And I would worry about something that became so burdensome that you couldn't decide which color cruisers you want to recommend. And I'm being facetious, but that's the level of problem. Now, as far as a chief's advisory committee, sure, I see that as the chief inviting people in so he or she is sure to hear what's happening in the community. One of the nuances of being a successful chief is to understand what's going on in the community before it becomes an issue.
Well, you meet with a group
Every year we have what we call a community meeting, a SWOT exercise, where strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we have community members that come in and tell me what I don't necessarily want to hear, but I need to hear. And it's been very successful. The council, I work for a town administrator who hires or fires me, and I have to perform. And if I don't perform, then, right when you get work. It's just as simple as that. I get worried with too much level of governance in anything. I mean, do you want 2 school boards? One that oversees the superintendent, one who oversees the, I'm not sure. You can see where it just never would end.
No, sir.
First of all, I'm a politician, used to be, so I'm going to make a statement.
I'm sorry.
So I'm going to make a statement and then say, right, and that's going to be, I'm going to turn it into a question that way. I understand what you're saying. I thought your answer was very good. First of all, I'm very impressed with all of you. Thank you for coming to the community. I congratulate the city manager, the mayor, and the council for doing this. I think what we're talking here is, do you want the people on the hospital board of trustees talking to the surgeon about how they're doing their surgery? And I think we have experts that we expect to do the police department. We have an expert here that hires them. I think we need to step back and let them do their job within the community's acceptance. I am very proud of the SAPD. I've seen it evolve. I've been here a long, long time. I've seen it evolve from something that was a joke to something that many of us are very, very proud of. And I think we've had some issues here. I think every department has issues. And I think we're dealing with them, and that's good for us. So I guess I'm saying this isn't, I'm hoping that this whole get-together here isn't a shadow on our police department, but it's saying times are changing and we're going to change as well. It's just a matter of they seeing the need for change, and that's where we're headed. Again, extremely proud of the SAPD. Anybody that's been around here as long as I have, if you can remember what we were, you tried to commit your crimes on a rainy day because you knew they weren't going to get out of the car. So it's different now. I think we have professionals here, and I'm extremely proud of them. Thank you for coming, and again, thank you to the council, to the mayor, and to Dom for making this happen.
I like your analogy.
Right?
If that was a question, the answer is yes. I did like your analogy about the surgeons, though, because that's, don't tell a surgeon how to do surgery, kind of, because they're held to these board certifications. You have state certification, then you're going to have your own standards of accountability. So I'm going to steal that going forward.
You can have it.
Good, thank you. So I think that's a good point, and I think we want to build upon the good that is here and help your leadership team kind of navigate some of these past issues and make sure that we can try to help prevent them going forward. To me, that's kind of what it's about. And that doesn't mean though that the surgeons can't meet with people that they had operated on and said, how were you treated? How was the service? What did you think about this? And that's what Dave is saying. That opportunity exists in some kind of chief's advisory group, community surveys that can be done online, this complaint process that we talked about, even an anonymous complaint needs to be addressed. So those are all kind of ways of filtering stuff back from the community to the police department. Because remember, I said if the police department, policing isn't acted upon the community, it's done with the community. And I think that that's critical.
Thank you.
If I can just echo what you're saying too, sir. Our experience, this afternoon with the chief and command staff, I mean, they couldn't have been more open. Everything we suggested, they're like, any way we can help. I mean, it's been very, very refreshing. They most definitely care about the community.
And if they were just playing the game, we'll find out. Ma'am?
I think this is really great to try to make any police force better. But the other thing that, and I don't know whether you could answer this, what I'd also like to see kind of go hand in hand with this is make the community members, I guess I'll just say it, I think the respect. I remember growing up, you saw a police officer or whatever, it was just like, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I think as a community, a lot of communities have lost that. And I think somehow we need to figure out to get that back, because it's a tough job. And I don't know whether that can go hand in hand with anything, I don't know, but that's something that I'd like to see.
You know, when I was a kid, the policemen were my friends.
Yes.
I knew that. But now I would enter a grocery store in uniform. You'd be nice, and that man's going to take you away. Thanks.
You know, some of that comes about with, over the last, as the police departments have, I'll use the term, have militarized a little bit, a little more standoffish than they used to be. I'm not talking about St. Albans, I'm talking kind of about nationally. You know, we talk about police officers out there with the windows rolled up, the windows are tinted so you can't see in the cruiser, and they don't stop and talk to the kids, they don't, you know, there's none of that. And that's kind of what policing became at some point. We've never advocated that. We think the windows should be down. You should be engaging with people at all levels, you know, the business owners, the people that are just out. I was telling these guys at dinner, I was off on the motorcycle with my wife on last Saturday, and we were, you know, 60, 70 miles from home. We were driving through a community down this back road, and as the police cruiser approached, there was no way that this young woman, police officer, could have known who I was or thought she mistook me for somebody. And she gave me a wave like this through the windshield. And I said to my wife over the intercom, I said, wasn't that nice? You know, to just, it wasn't just, you know, driving by. It was, she waved to us going by. It was just kind of welcoming. And to me, I thought that's kind of a nice thing to see in police departments. And we've kind of gotten away from that a little bit. And I think that gets back, that actually can earn respect. It's not that standoffish thing that we've seen. And, you know, I don't know enough about what these, about what your PD does for details and stuff like that. So I could be stepping on somebody's toes here. But I know that there's been a move in some places, you know, you'll see officers working on these construction details that wear shorts and a t-shirt and a baseball cap. And I don't know if it happens up here or not in this area. But, you know, so whenever cops that work for me wanted to change their outside detail uniform to something like that, I said, if you want to look like Cub Scouts, you know, you'll get paid like Cub Scouts and you'll be respected like, you know, it was just this, you're paid to look like a police officer and to act like a police officer. And I think that begets some of the respect that you're talking about. So it's a two-way street. But some of that is just society.
Right.
And it's not just St. Albans, it's, I don't know that I could go back to being a street officer again because of that.
I mean, it's really tough. I would like to see somehow, I don't know whether we, you know, with our grandkids, you try to teach them respect, and the officers should get respect, and that is lost somewhere.
It is societal, but we also have to earn it, you know. Somebody else? Yes, sir.
Just a quick question. You talked several times about a report. When are we going to see that report? And is there anything in there that would make it so it shouldn't be shared widely with the public?
I don't think we see anything about the report.
During when you were talking about community policing, it was talked about a report.
So the different reports that we've said to be posted online. So that would be, you know, the complaints report. At the end of the year, a report from the police department that says, here's the complaints that, you know, here's what happened as far as complaints go. We talked about posting a report on the response to resistance.
That's the annual report.
But there's no report that's going to say, hey, these are the recommendations that we have made for St. Albans City.
I mean, to me, the best way to use us is to make the things happen, not to make recommendations. So there are times when we do organizational studies. So let's just say you want to do an organizational study of the St. Albans Police Department. It probably costs you about $30,000. And at the end of the day, we would do a PowerPoint presentation. You'd probably have maybe 50, 60, 70 recommendations. And then you're left. They either get done or they don't get done. I think this is a pretty nice opportunity for us as we're doing this. Like I said, we already came in with some documents today that can be used like next week if they were altered that quickly. So I think that for the deliverables to be the actual let's get it done, then the here's what you should do is much more efficient for the city of St. Albans.
I'm almost thinking we were hired to be, and you,
If I can just elaborate on the scope a little bit. One of the things I think
it's muffled.
This is a four-step process. Tonight is step one, where we lay out the vision, the aspirations, the values. Step two is this team goes to work with our leadership team, taking those values and that vision and crafting it into specific policies. And there's probably at least 4 of them that are foundational. Recruitment policy, backgrounding policy, our policies on internal investigations, and our policy on response to resistance. Those are the 4 foundational policies. And that's phase 2, and that's very iterative and collaborative between the experts and our local leaders. Phase 3 is it comes back to the city council in a public meeting, and that's where those that would like more citizen input and oversight and access, that's where you have that. That's where the city council says, we're going to review our response to resistance policy, just like we review a parking ordinance or a zoning bylaw, and then the council passes it. The council sets policy. And then the 4th step is we take that back to the department, having got the buy-in, having got the national experts, and the tie-in back to the national best practices, and train our folks in how we're going to implement those in the department. And that'll be done with MRI and with the leaders in the department, so that the boots on the ground see that there's the buy-in all the way up to the top. To the extent that, folks keep looking for a report or a findings about what was wrong, we've already, I think, said pretty publicly, we could have done a better job with our backgrounds. We could have done a better job with making sure that we're getting the right people on the team. That's the finding. Now it's time to get to work fixing it, and that's what these guys are here to do. But there isn't going to be, unless the council wants to redefine the scope, there isn't going to be a specific report of this, this, and this. The work and the main deliverable is going to be setting the direction, adjusting our course, and training our people. And one of the big policies that'll be adopted is the accountability mechanisms. What happens when we get officers who go off the rails? Is there anything that you would tweak to that?
No, I think that was right. The only thing I would add is we would hope that within some matter of months that the community can see a difference. We made some recommendations today to some content on the website. So I hope that from a year from now, you're not dealing. I mean, some of these issues that have already happened, they're going to have a little bit of legacy, I'm afraid. Those just going to have to take care of themselves. But I would hope that we're able to, that in a year from now, you're able to say, boy, this has been a pretty good little journey we've done here, and we're in a much better place than we were a year ago. And those are definable by reports, by internal reporting out in a transparent fashion to the community, by reading policy that has become a culture of your police department. So I hope that those are the real deliverables. And to me, that's much better than a report that looks back and says, here's what they were doing wrong all along, because that doesn't move you forward. All that does is talk about the past. So that's why, to us, this is a much nicer project than those places where they're just really looking to go after somebody, to blame somebody for something. And that's when we go in and do an organizational study.
The other thing I thought that happened today that I kind of enjoyed, because it's a positive experience for us too, it's not like there's something wrong here and let's root it out. It was really engaged people. So today I kind of had this mentoring kind of feel for what we were doing today, talking about these are things we can do and it has this result if you want to try this. And I think there was a lot of embracing that kind of message from us.
And if we meet resistance, I'm sorry, 1 second. If we meet resistance, the city is the client, not the police department. So, I would be reporting to Dom if we are having some kind of interference, resistance, whatever it is. I mean, that's just the way these things work. But after meeting with command staff today, I don't anticipate that at all. They seem to be embracing this. And if they're not, we'll find that out soon enough. Sure.
One of the things that, more than close to a quarter century of doing this type of work around the country, one of the things that I've seen oftentimes in circumstances like this is when we get in with the command staffs of the police department to have these open discussions about our observations and areas we think there may be some room for improvement, or even just a subtle tweak. We get this, arms crossed, looking at us like we've got three heads. What I observed today was this: taking notes, listening to us actively, engaging us in conversation, responding to the things that we were saying. And that was not a subtle difference. That is something that, to me, was indicative of an organization that was willing, anxious to get to work.
Other questions, ma'am?
Yes, you mentioned that the subject of culture came up, and I think that's an interesting one. How do you change the culture in a hierarchical organization like a police department? How do you get past Mo and Ben and Jason and down to the guys who are actually, and the men and women who are actually out in those cruisers? How do you do that? Have you successfully done that in departments? Have you seen it done?
That's a really good question. And I'm going to take a shot and we'll go right down the table because that's the value of MRI. We all have our own opinions. So the culture should be modeled at the top by the leadership, right? And that's modeled to the people below. And good behavior is positively reinforced. I think I used the term before, catch people doing things right. Bad behavior, there are consequences for. And so that's right. We've got the modeling, we've got the consequences and the reinforcement, both positive and negative, and then we've got the hiring. So you've got it at the top, you've got it at the bottom, and you're taking care of the middle with the reinforcement. So, I mean, to us, a critical piece is the hiring, because again, it's the traits of the people you're hiring. They're going to be tomorrow's culture, and with the leadership that we dealt with today, we liked the culture that we saw with those individuals in the room. So now it's a matter of if we have to model to them a little bit, and then they model that down. And I think that making sure that your hiring practices are right on is the other part, really big piece of the culture. Okay?
It really is a good question because it really is the essence of what's going on in law enforcement and how two police departments can be so, 15 minutes apart but so different. And it is about candidly, a lot has to do with the chief and the command staff, and as long as they're on the same page. If it is a quasi-military situation, and if the department personnel recognize that the police chief says and means that, geez, I want, when you see some kids playing hoop in a neighborhood, stop and throw some balls at them. That's okay. Or it's the little things in life about, changing the tire or, things like that that are insignificant in our world but mean a lot to people that we're working for. Just little things that, reinforce the positive and saying, this is how we want to run this police department, and saying it enough that they'll do it because they want to please the chief. They want to please the community. They want to be, feel satisfied in their role. So a lot has to do with who's at the top of the organization and what he or she sets as an example. Do they shovel the steps off the snow? Are they, the proverbial, do they step over the piece of paper or do they stop and pick it up? We're talking about leadership is often very subtle, but people don't miss any of that stuff, and they will emulate good behavior.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Certainly, as an organization, speaking one voice, and it's incumbent upon the chief and the command staff to always be on the same page when a final decision is made. Certainly, disagreement is part of the process, but when a final decision is made, you need to speak in one voice on that to the people that work for you. It's incumbent top to bottom. First line supervisors are huge, and everything has to be, taught the same way. The way that the chief decides we're going to do it as an organization, that needs to permeate the organization. We talk about modeling, and what that really means is the rules are chosen because they're the right thing. And they're the right thing, and that's, the chief's going to follow the rules, all the way down to the first day officer's going to follow the rules. There will be no difference. There's not separate rules for, a lieutenant. There's not separate rules for sergeant. Again, policies aren't just policies. You live and breathe them because they're the right way to do things. And that comes from the top, and it is ultimately incumbent upon the chief.
So one of the things that I think is that the answer lies in this room. One of the things that I think the chief is going to get sick and tired of us saying to him is you've got to engage with the community in times of when there is no crisis. Going out and speaking with community groups, stopping on the corner to chat with the person that's getting ready to cross the street with them. Those types of non-invasive communications will help frame the chief's mind with regard to what culture that the community wants the police department to have. And by everything that these guys have talked about, the trickle-down effect of that, the waterfall effect of that, from the chief on down through to the new hire police officers, engaging the community in the selection of new police officers, making sure that every police officer understands the core values of the police department and hears them over and over and over again and exercises them in every way they conduct themselves, both on and off duty. Those things, there is no light switch effect. Don't expect to leave here tonight and by tomorrow morning, everything's going to come up rainbows. That's not realistic. But if you, as a community, return the favor and engage with the police department and open yourselves to those conversations, the culture will change. And all of a sudden you're going to wake up one morning and you're going to realize, boy, that police department is something different today than it was yesterday.
Anybody else? Yes, sir. Right in the back.
It don't hurt for the police department, for the individual community folks to acknowledge the police department by waving to them when you see them go by. I wave to state troopers when I go by my place or what have you. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, not at all.
It's
It's a partnership with the community.
But it's easy for the cop, they should be doing it too. And it's the stuff like that we should talk about. But they get nervous that no one's going to wave back to them.
come out, it's pretty good. We got some pretty good folks.
No, I
I'm
agree.
kind of proud.
We agree.
So, but did you have a question back there with the camera?
Yeah. What are your what words might you have for people who see everything that's been described tonight, from the accreditation process to the recommendations process to the communications between MRI and police, down to MRI's recommendations to the city council? Do you have any words for people who might see that as a bit of a power silo that's very insular and maybe not open to a large community that the police is serving, namely lower income people or people who have maybe had negative experiences with police? From top on down, it seems that we're talking to former cops or law enforcement or justice professionals, and there isn't really any perspective, or I'm curious if there is a perspective from outside the silo of power. And to specify it specifically, what might your words be for people who are concerned that from the top down, this is something that a conversation is that's happening between people who hold power, police, and people in the justice system, and less so with the people that they're actively policing? And I only bring this up because the incidences that led to people being called here and you all taking time off your hands to deal with this has just been people who've been brutalized and assaulted who I guess aren't really represented here right now and don't seem to be represented in this conversation. Do you have any words for people with those concerns?
Can I start on that, and then maybe Dave, so we can talk a little bit about procedural justice. So those people out in the community, they're part of the community. And you've heard us talk about engaging the community. Dave talked about throwing ball with the kids. When you have those, those at-risk type folks in the community that might not necessarily be engaged, that doesn't mean that the officers can't go out and actively try to engage them in a way that is positive instead of negative. And I'm sure that you had a lot of this national just based on the size and the demographics. So those people have a voice as well, and they need to know that they have that voice, and they should not be strangers to the police officers. The police officers should be engaging them as they are every other member of your community, right? So that's one way that they can get involved to some degree and have a say. The chief can reach out to those folks. I'll bet you that your command staff knows who a lot of those people are that you're talking about. There may be some services that can be offered to those people. But there's also a concept called procedural justice that maybe one of these guys is better to speak on than myself. And that's kind of what that's directed at to some degree.
I was thinking that
that was a deep thought.
It was a deep thought, yeah. I was thinking about someone who mentored me when I was a young police officer, and community policing at the time was one of the flash phrases that was being used. And he thought that was a joke because in small town policing, there was a recognition of what community policing was, which was relationships, relationships, relationships. And the onus is on the police department to create those relationships. We will instill that. In other words, they have to make opportunities to engage people that may be not engaged or unengageable, but something has to be done. They know what it is. They know their community. They can be thinking about that. I know one of the things I do for the federal government is review grants. One of the grants for the Boston Police Department was they wanted to buy an ice cream truck. What are you talking about? Well, they wanted to create an opportunity to interact with kids. If they had an ice cream truck and was giving away ice cream for free, they thought they might be able to engage young people and then, play some ball, do some things that were constructive at a playground in the city of Boston. Innovative, but seemingly simple. But, things like that, and I'm being somewhat far-fetched, but what they were doing in essence was creating an opportunity to reach people who seemingly were unreachable and create an opportunity for dialogue that wasn't about, I'm here to rush your mother.
and certainly, you know, coming from a larger city PD, I was lucky to have the resources that, you know, some ways we engage. I mean, we had a full-blown police athletic league with a community center, boxing program, after-school tutoring, and that was all right in the heart of the center of the city. And officers would go in and out constantly. We had a dedicated police athletic league officer. And then about 4 years ago, we took on My Brother's Keeper, which was under President Obama, and to this day, I believe we're the only ones in that, but we definitely the first ones in New Hampshire to take that on. We opened another community center in another portion of the inner city, you know, to help get inner city kids up to reading level 3rd grade. So you certainly, I had the resources to do that, but there's also the little things like, you know, literally your crime watch groups in each area, you know, the chief meeting with them, having coffee, the cop stuff, and all that stuff. It costs you hardly nothing, but it matters. I mean, just walking through neighborhoods and talking to people. I mean, that costs you nothing. So, you know, I was able to do it from the standards of, you know, we've got all these programs because we got government grants, we've got huge donors and things like that. Being in the city, you know, right down to, you know, I can walk the homeless path behind the library in Nashua and talk to people. And that costs nothing. So it's all what you want to make it. And there's opportunity, anything you can think of that you can engage with anyone is something.
Now, you may have a homeless, you know, population here. Most places do, right? So a question would be, so how does the police department interact with them? Are they only interacting with them when they get a call from a business owner because this homeless person is sleeping behind the building or is camped out in front of their business? Well, we would say, look for reasons to engage that person on a positive way, not in a negative way. So it's not dealing with that person when you're called, it's dealing with that, it's going to engage with that person because they're a member of the community. And what can you do to help them? And that's, so, you know, to us,
Which circles back to, in my opinion, the very essence of why we're here in the first place. Hiring the right people for St. Albans that will think like that. Where I want to make a difference is not a cliche. It's what they do. So that's what we hope to leave you with. Instill that in this organization that just wants to embrace this and may not quite know how to get there.
Can we just take
It's interesting how you mentioned the unfortunate folks that can't be here tonight or what happened. And in reference to what's going on in the country as we speak right now, about how lives matter, as far as I'm concerned, all lives matter. I don't care who they are.
You had a question again?
Yeah, so would you say, or would you, just to clarify, outside of community events, and I'll use coffee as with a coffee as an example. I guess, is that the only other?
People can't afford the coffee.
Right. Would you say that is the only place that someone who wants to interact with police has to do so? Would you count that as an oversight? That person has oversight over police?
Yeah, you know, the problem is we're going back to that whole idea again of what I mentioned at the very beginning, where there's no one doing this stuff. There's no one employed by because everything's being cut, and everyone expects the police to do this. Well, why is the community doing this? Why does it have to be the police? The police should be partners with this, but can't it be a community that's doing this? That would seem, you know, basic to me.
And to just ask a follow-up, you mentioned earlier that 90% of the police duties are really
quality of life issues.
Yeah, quality of life issues. So talking about that real frustration that I hear of the police being asked to do a wide spectrum of services or provide a wide spectrum of services. Do you guys have any thoughts or plans, or more specifically, what non-police related services do you, or groups do you involve in your conversation about better serving the 90% of people, or 90% of situations that don't involve use of force, as you said?
Well, first of all, you know, I think you mischaracterized that 90%. That's not a problem for us. That's simply a recognition that that's what this job is. And when you get hired into this job, somebody once told me that police work is 99% sheer boredom punctuated by 1% sheer terror, right? So, and that was in 1980 when I became a police officer. So nothing has changed. So that 90% of dealing with those mundane things, that's the job. We have no problem doing that. And every police department should understand that that's what their job is, and they should embrace that.
Yeah, it's much better to have all that than, have the terror part.
Yeah, but it turns out to be 90% terror.
Yeah. Maybe I'm hearing your question wrong, sir, but, as far as the police, and here's my big thing about being in touch with stakeholders in the community. I mean, the police can certainly be the type that identify a problem. I remember, I got a call from a citizen that we met through a crime watch group who was complaining about a sidewalk area behind some train tracks that was all overgrown and homeless people selling drugs and using drugs and all that. So I called somebody from Park Rec and they sent somebody out and they mowed it down. They mowed it and now, the people moved on because there was nowhere to hide. I mean, that's using, they're calling the police, but, certainly because we have contacts with stakeholders and things like that. I mean, we started a couple of community gardens in the inner city because one of our officers just on patrol talking to a family was told that, there's no supermarkets in the downtown area and they're having trouble getting fresh vegetables. So they started working with the city, working with the Public Works and Park Rec, and they set up a bunch of community gardens. Now, the police didn't take credit for that, but we helped with the problem because of our contacts with stakeholders, and the people felt confident enough to talk to us. So I guess I'm hearing your question is, the police can engage the community with, in any issue without it having to be a police issue and still have no problem with it. Did I hear you? Am I hearing you wrong or?
No, just my question was, or my thoughts were, the 90% as you described being social work with the homeless, or at least interacting with people who might need to receive social work services and, homeless allyship. Would you give a recommendation to the city to maybe work with local partners and agencies to address those underlying issues in those 90% of cases and deal with the 10% of cases that outright use of force is required? Would you give a recommendation like that and perhaps involve other outside groups, groups outside the power silo of police and justice officials?
I think that it's a role of the police department to engage those other services that might be available through other avenues and connect to the people that might need those services with the service providers. That's a primary role of the police department. So to the extent that those services are available, and I'm sure they are in St. Albans, it's a matter of your police department engaging the community enough to know who needs those services and then kind of bringing that together, being the facilitator.
And they're likely already doing that. And I think you're implying that take away the 90% and just let them do the 90%. Is that what you're saying? That's not realistic because, again, it's not the social issues. It's loud parties, domestics, things like that. That's not going to be fixed by a social issue, a social agency.
Honestly, that guy is starting to take us down a path that really doesn't have a lot to do with what we're talking about today. And I think we've addressed that in a number of different ways. And, you may want us to say some things that we're likely not going to say.
But just to be clear, this entire process involves solely city officials, police, the accreditation system, which is law enforcement or justice officers, and no other civilian or outside groups whatsoever, now and down the line.
Well, I thought we've been talking a lot tonight about engagement and transparency and involving the community. So I thought we were pretty clear in that this should become this is a partnership. Policing is kind of a partnership. When you talk about oversight, oversight has kind of a different meaning. So holding people accountability might be a better word than oversight. So that's a role of the community, is to hold your police department through its appointed and elected officials accountable. So that, to me, to us, in our experience, that's where that involves everybody.
But what are the concrete ways that happens that you're recommending?
So say the question a different way.
What are the concrete ways that accountability, so So you said, we've talked about community engagement and that process multiple times tonight, but it doesn't seem clear to me, and it seems to Zach either, what that actually looks like. Like, concretely, what does community engagement and policing look like?
So it looks different every place. So, you know, they talked about some different programs. We talked about transparency and reporting things out. If the community sees something that they don't like that's reported out, it's your responsibility to ask questions through your city council or through your council meetings or to go to the police chief. You know, we're advocating for involvement in the hiring process. That's certainly some engagement. You know, and the transparency of the police department. You can't say what it looks like. You'll feel it when it starts to happen. There's no flip of a switch. There's no magic answer. There's no silver bullet, so to speak. It becomes the culture of the police department, and the community will feel like it's respected, like it has a say, because they are involved with, through this transparency process and an engagement process, that they're involved with the police department. And I don't, for me, there's no other really better way to say that. It's not about telling them how to do it or what it looks like in St. Albans. The culture of the police department will be able to find those paths with the community. That's really the only way I can address that.
And certainly, you know, the city council, the city manager, the mayor, you know, they'll hold the police department accountable. That's what we vote in the office for.
So with that, we're going to wrap it up, folks. It's 8:30. I want to thank MRI for being here. I think we give them a round of applause.